Uh, good afternoon, good morning. I'm Dominique Lazarski. I chair Uecna, the European Union Against Aircraft Nuisance. And this is the European NGO representing communities before the European institutions and also at ICAO. We often struggle to find the right angle to fight aviation noise and emissions of pollutants. We can only know that this is a highly political matter, and we have all had this answer when mentioning noise: jobs, jobs, jobs. So how can we address these economic points and stress the health aspect with our politicians? Wouter Lohmann is our man today. He will try to help us find an angle to catch politicians' interest. Eleftheria Mfietzi, Uecna's treasurer, a Greek campaigner, health expert, and climate ambassador in Greece. You now have the floor to introduce Wouter to our audience today.
Thank you, Dominique. Welcome all. Today, our speaker is Mr. Wouter Lohmann, who is a board member of Uecna and our webmaster. He lives near Schiphol, Amsterdam airport, and Wouter has been fighting aircraft nuisance for decades now. He has been active to give citizens more influence in decision-making on matters that are important to them. He has sunk his teeth into the aviation dossier because big companies and politicians are colluding to silence the citizens and make them deaf and sick. His presentation is about ways to combat false arguments from government and the aviation sector. Wouter, floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Eleftheria. I'll go and share my screen. Look if this is working. Yes, there we are. Hello, everybody. Yes, I live in Amsterdam, close to Schiphol. And seeing the title of this webinar, you might ask, do you as a citizen stand a chance in the fight against the aviation sector? An aviation sector that builds its image on dreams of faraway places, being as free as a bird, myths of being of societal and economic importance. We heard it in the introduction, jobs, jobs, jobs. Well, a sector that is supported by powerful governments. And at first glance, you seem to have no chance, but I'm going to show you that there are successes to be achieved. The theme of tonight is strengthening your position on aviation towards your government, and with questions for you and your government. Have a look. This is yes. How to attend this webinar? There are a few ways to do that. You can shout hooray every time you recognize a method you already know, and spot for more. And you can say softly, "Wow, that's nice what he found," and you can do, yeah, we listen to hear more, but the best way to listen to this webinar is to use each point in this presentation to ask yourself if you have tried every suggestion to the fullest yet. And that's the way we want to speak about this. I will present some aviation myths and ask questions about them. Questions about how you can be cheated by your government, by research institutes, and by the aviation sector. We're going not to try to answer all questions tonight. There are homework for all of us, inclusive myself and the Dutch who listen to this presentation. Okay, let's start. How much traffic does your airport need? Has that question ever occurred to you? Aviation has to grow for the benefit of the nation, is what you always hear. And who benefits from that growth? Is it the country? Is it the region? Is it maybe you? Or are it private interests as airline companies, export firms, and tourist industry? But the most important question is there a careful consideration with public interest as noise limits, health, safety, nature, climate, and housing? I'm afraid not, otherwise you wouldn't be here. How about working towards a growth stop, or even better, to a reduction of the number of flights? Did you dare ask that question? Is it possible to talk about less flights because of the reduction in business passengers, maybe? Because of the pandemic, or because of the health damage, about mental and physical damage? I remember that only a few years ago, I was the only person in our residence group who dared to ask for a reduction in the number of flights, and it was considered unwise from a negotiation point of view. A growth stop was the maximum plea. Fortunately, that has changed, and it's now well appreciated to bring it up the point in the Netherlands. The next point is, what is the importance of the night flights, if there are any? I know they have successfully asked that question in Frankfurt, and we can learn from that. In the Netherlands, the number is at least slowly being reduced in the coming years. So you can have success sometimes. Another question is, what are meaningful destinations? Ever thought about that? The aviation sector will always say a large network is essential for the economy. But what is the quality?
Wouter, excuse me, can you interrupt a second? There's something on your microphone. Everyone is muted, and there's a sound which is not very pleasant. Are you touching something?
Oh, I'm afraid not, but maybe it's better this way?
Yes.
Okay, yes, I have to touch the screen to okay, I'll be careful. What's the network quality of your airport? Is the basic premise the more planes the better, the more destinations the better? Has the economic value per destination ever been investigated? Well, we did that in the Netherlands. A small group of people did that, and they carefully researched the commercial value of each destination, and Schiphol Airport has more than 300 destinations, a third of which is of very little value. They are only intended to lure transfer passengers to Schiphol and then take them over the ocean to other continents, and at such low cost that it hardly yields anything except a lot of superfluous air traffic. And without this hub function, you can cut the 500,000 with 100,000 flights per year. And another 50,000 we're going to nearby destinations by train. Did you know that there are 60 flights per day to London only? And there's a high-speed train running already at a low frequency. Only 10 extra trains can replace all 20,000 flights. Well, I think that's significant. Well, is employment an argument? Yes, of course. It's always the argument. But in the Netherlands, even the trade unions believe that the number of flights should be reduced, partly because of poor working conditions. Well, you don't have to seek for an enemy if you find them on your own territory. That is the trade unions from the airport. Journalists recently showed that the work for platform employees is particularly unhealthy, while the airport and the government in Denmark, for example, are working together to substantially reduce poor working conditions in terms of ultrafine particles. Nothing is changing in the Netherlands, despite alarming signals about health. It costs too much money to take substantial measures, so you can challenge that. And is there no better work to do than on the airport? Yes, of course. And we know all that there's a competition for workers, not only in the Netherlands, but also on all those airports where people were fired during the pandemic. How are the employment conditions in your region? I think they're better than on the airport mostly, and you can find out with a social cost benefit analysis. Well, has there ever been an independent analysis being made at your airport? Because there are many different variables when looking at aviation, and you may have to make sure that variables like environmental quality and CO2 reduction, NOx, ultrafine particles are also taken into account. Then what technical sentences, it's good to know that in an economic limited region, more flights might lead to regional economic growth. But in metropolitan regions, big cities, growth in the number of flights creates demand. People that want to fly, they come to the airport, and that's the growing factor. Okay, how about legal protection? There are many legal exceptions for aviation, we all know. And have they ever been tested is the question. No taxes on kerosene, for example. CO2 reduction doesn't count for the aviation sector, we all know. Deviations in agreed flight routes are always explained with weather conditions or safety reasons. And when you detect a calculation error, it's always unfavorable for residents. LDEN, the measurement for noise, is the holy grail, with which all individual complaints go in the trash. But have these exceptions ever been seriously tested in your country? And we are only discussing the topic is always taking much time, so that's not enough. Are there any laws you can rely on? Although the Constitution should protect you against unacceptable nuisances, aviation is always exempt from any rule. Individual legal protection seems reasonable to me, and we can work on that. Does your government comply with European laws and regulations? Yes, we are in Europe, so I take the European laws, and I know our Uecna members know what I mean by this, and realize that many governments ignore and delay the rules as long as possible. You can challenge that. Does your government take initiatives to change the rules? It's often said that international rules and that you as a country must all abide them. But that's, of course, that's nonsense. You can always propose changes. In case of the ticket tax here in Europe, the Netherlands has taken the initiative in Brussels for new rules. And although the tax is very low now, the rates are gradually increasing. Does your airport meet all licenses? You might never have asked that by yourself, but in the Netherlands, we have two starting points with regard to environment, nitrogen emissions, and nature conservation. The airport doesn't meet both requirements, which do apply to all other industries. So you might be able to find surprising allies also for financing your campaigns. Nitrogen is a main theme on behalf of only one person in the Netherlands, and since May 2019, no house can be built, no road can be constructed, and no airport can be opened because of too much produced nitrogen.
So sorry, Walter, but there's a sound again. Excuse me.
Okay. I hope you did understand what I said, but I can go on, Dominique, or should I
Yes,
repeat?
yes, I think you can
okay.
go on.
Oh,
I think the pages are somewhere.
yes, maybe I'll try to look in the camera and read my paper, so I'll look a bit less in the camera. People are looking at the screen. Okay. What I said was that the nitrogen compounds are very important in the Netherlands and mostly are created by cattle. By the way, it's cows and chicken, etc. But aircraft also take their part. And yes, because of the nature, we have to reduce nitrogen, and it blocks everything. It's really a serious problem now. And when the airport argues, we were here before these kinds of permits, that doesn't work. The court did not agree. And as a result, politicians are now confronted with major problems, as I said. Do major suppliers have all permits? It is a relevant question since Shell, the oil company, has been sued for their CO2 emissions. And not only must the company itself reduce emissions, but it also must ensure that customers pollute less. Well, a bit difficult with all those kerosene they produce. We go to the next one. As I just said, governments state that they are bound hand and foot, and we cannot do anything because of European or ICAO rules. What do you know about the instruments that regulate aviation, like slots and taxes and human rights and laws, local and international? It should be good if we know what we're talking about, and it's quite difficult. It's quite it's not so easy to know what all those things mean and how you can influence them. It would be helpful to monitor aviation policy. In the Netherlands, we citizens are trying to get the Ministry of Transport to set up such a board as the next one. Yes, an independent advisory board. It's ambitious, but if you want to take citizens serious, as the government claims, you have to go into that direction. And if you already have such a board, such as the United Kingdom, do they work internationally, and can you contact with them? That's what Uecna wants, always working internationally and learn from each other. Now for the last slide, number 9, are you well prepared? Are you being heard by policymakers? Do you know examples where citizens are in dialogue with their governments? I've told you something about the Dutch situation, but there are good examples of citizens in dialogue with their government, Austria, for example. And in these dialogues, of course, good arguments are crucial. Has the relationship between the government and research agencies and the aviation sector ever been exposed? In the Netherlands, there were close ties between the government, research institute, and commercial aviation parties, and journalism has exposed these. And that has led to some disentanglement. So it might help also in your case. Are there independent journalists who can help you, if necessary, using examples from abroad? For example, we have Follow the Money. That's an English title for a Dutch institute, which has invested in the money flows of towards KLM, the company Air France KLM, which made it clear that the government support in times of Corona mainly ended up with the Irish leasing companies. KLM leases many of their aircraft, and to fuel producers. So billions of euros only went to that companies. That was not really support for the people working at the airport. Have you tried to get financial or logistical support from medium-sized companies? One of the most critical websites on aviation in the Netherlands is financed by local companies that employ people who are inconvenienced by the busy air traffic. And because they also receive orders from companies that deal with Schiphol, they donate anonymously. But this is a way you can create capital for your actions and for lawsuits. It might be an idea. Do you use all social media to get support for your vision? Video, Twitter, presentations. On the Uecna website, you can find a few examples of presentations by our own professor. He is also listening tonight. And yes, he is now well known among Dutch policymakers. I've produced over 20 videos with him, so use your creativity. There are more ways to be creative on this way of influencing. And last but not least, do you have contact with members of parliament, national and local? You can make petitions, do webinars like this. We did that in the Netherlands. Matt Poelmans, who is also here, has made those contacts. And we had a very successful webinar because you know much more about aviation than many local councillors. And they will be happy with your contribution. So try to have contact with them. So the answer should be yes. You have to have contact with members of parliament, local and national. Well, the last slide is actually the beginning, since realize complaining doesn't help. Try to help your government push the boundaries. That's the way we try to do it. And sending a paper is not enough. You have to invest in personal contact with parliamentarians, and then you can, for example, have them formulate adequate motions and make contact with political party spokespersons, contact ministry officials, and offer them your help instead of complaining. It's a good way, it works. And as a citizen, you first have to discover the weak spots in your country. And then strike again. Yes, you have to strike. That's too fast. Strike, correct. Oh, there's not a bonus slide. Oh, that's nice. What is the bonus slide? Ah, the Volkskrant. That's a Dutch paper, so a bit like the Guardian in England. They published a paper on the 17th of June. That's 3 days ago. And the headline is Trend Break. Cabinet wants significant reduction of Schiphol Airport. And they say it's because of noise nuisances, but nitrogen, I told you about, and ultrafine particles are also playing a major role. And see today's article, health risk around Schiphol due to ultrafine particles. Increased risk of death from cardiac arrhythmias and increased risk of preterm birth. Today was that in the news. And it's a ministry report on the study of the effects of ultrafine particles, and will be published this week, but this was for publication. And then we have the summary. Well, detect and challenge the myths your government uses to support the aviation sector. Expose and entangle too close links between your government, research, and aviation. Detect and obtain support from potential allies, media, and from within the civil service. There are people within the civil service you can be sure of who can support you, only not openly. And try to help your government with good arguments and go for the weak spots to win. Thank you.
Wouter, thank you very much indeed for that. I think if you stop sharing your screen now, we can all see each other. Feel free to turn on your cameras if you wish. If you, in the middle of your lunch or your dinner, you can leave them off, but it's good to see you all. Just introduce myself, I'm John Stewart. I worked for a long time with residents at Heathrow Airport, and I'm now the Vice Chair of Uecna. And I'll be facilitating the next half hour or so of questions and discussion. Just to start with one point in the chat, Darlene, you asked about the video links that Wouter talked about. I think Elvathera has just now put them on in the chat, but they're also all available on the Uecna website.
Thank you.
Okay, no problems. Right, Wouter posed a lot of really interesting questions there. And I think what I'm going to do, if it's all right with you, Wouter, is just see what reactions people have. It would be particularly interesting, I think, as Wouter hinted, to see if people can use their own experiences, either good or bad, in their own country to develop and build on some of the ideas that Wouter outlined. That would be useful, but there may be many other points you wish to make. So if you put up your hand, either a virtual hand or a real hand, do so. There's quite a lot of people on the call and I can't see everybody at the same time. So if I miss you, just feel free to start talking. Who would like to kick off?
Hello, you are annoyed by aircraft. You're not the only one in your neighborhood. We have a board.
I've got a noise coming. I've got a noise coming from somewhere. I'm not quite sure where, but I think it might be somebody just speaking in there. But Richard, you've got your hand up. So would you like to kick off?
Yeah, thank you, Wouter. That was a very interesting conversation and presentation. What results have you got from your initiative so far? Your positives from all the good work you've been doing?
Yeah, it's a really good positive question, Richard. Wouter.
Well, I think the most important is in the last slide, where the newspaper says there needs to be a reduction. And I can say it's my work only, but from 2015, we've been very forced with fighting with the media also, and with a good website, and all journalists knew us. And the public opinion has changed those years because of there was really a terrific noise going worse. It was many flights more than 5 years ago. So all people who are fighting together, yes, I think we now have the point. Last week was the big break, you can say, that are seriously discussed about reducing the number of flights. And it's not only because we have such good arguments, but the law is, I think, most important. They are going to see that they're going to lose when they're going to court for the nitrogen and for the CO2 and for the other fine particles as well. And they say it's also good for what people want, less noise.
Okay, thank you.
Because Wouter, it's quite significant, really, that politicians in the Netherlands are actually saying they want the number of flights reduced. That's quite significant, and I think what you're saying here is that it's a mixture of public opinion, residents impacted by noise, as well as the other developing issues like climate change, ultrafine particles. Elaine, we'll go on to you. Welcome.
Yes, hello, and thank you so much. I would like to ask Wolfer a question. I don't know if it would be the same, you would experience the same problems, but here in America, we have the FAA, which controls, it's a regulatory aviation agency that controls everything. The problem that we face here is that the FAA will deliberately put out false narratives as far as the impacts to the communities are concerned. And they reinforce this time and time again. It's almost like the lie becomes the truth. So we're up against an agency that does not admit to the any impacts. And I just wondered if you've had the same problems dealing with the aviation industry in your country.
Well, it's not the aviation industry, I think. It's more the ministry who is giving room to all airports to grow. And that has to be changed because we have a very densely populated country here. And well, there is a maximum and that has been reached now. And we have to influence the policy makers also that we get as citizens more influence. And that's parallel going on at the moment. So we are in near contact with the ministry to have more objective measures to say what's right and wrong on noise, on nitrogen, on how much flights are necessary for the Netherlands, because we have a hub function which is completely not suitable for the Netherlands. Such a small country, so many flights. We are the third airport of Europe, I think. Well, it's more political here than that an FAA can say what has to happen.
I think that's interesting, and I think, Elaine, that I suspect no European country has an FAA, an equivalent of an FAA with quite the same sort of powers that your FAA does. Because I know they're absolutely considerable, and they're influencing government. In the UK, and I think it's perhaps the same in most European countries, we have equivalents of FAAs, sometimes called CAAs, sometimes with other names, but they tend to be an arm of government rather than taking the big decisions. As Wouter says, it tends to be the government which takes the big decisions. Now, they're very often, of course, as Wouter said in his presentation, influenced by the aviation industry, including our equivalent of the FAA. But I think it's my feeling that you've got a particular problem in the States with the real, almost overweening power and influence of the FAA. Do you feel that's perhaps right?
Yes, I do agree. And I think that that is one of the problems, the tremendous problems that we're facing here in the United States, is the fact that, first of all, the FAA, in conjunction with the aviation industry, have really relegated all the rules, regulations that overpower any group that we put up. Or have, and it's been growing, our organizations have been growing across the nation, which I'm very glad to see. But we are fighting a very, very powerful agency with the FAA. And to be perfectly honest with you, our lawmakers, we have very strong lobbyists here. The aviation industry is very, very, have very powerful lobbyists, which control a lot of our laws and how it is put upon the communities. So we are fighting quite a battle. It's a war. It's not a battle. We fight battles, but we're fighting a tremendous war here, because of the fact, as you have stated, John, that the FAA is so powerful. It almost acts as its own unilateral agency outside of government functions, it seems to a lot of us most of the time.
No, indeed, and certainly when I've sat in on some of your conferences, that's exactly the impression that comes across to me. Michael has put a quite interesting bit of information in the chat, which people may want to have a look at. Any other comments or questions? They don't need to be questions, they can be comments about your own situation. And if you're from the Netherlands, do feel free to add to what Wouter has said but Amel, you've got your hand up, and welcome.
Thank you, John. Well, that was a very interesting discussion, as always, with Uecna. I just wanted to point out that we've had a lot of problems in the last few months. In fact, every day there is something about chaos, either at Heathrow or at Gatwick. In fact, today I was reading something, I think, about Charlottesville, where a lady had a heart attack trying to get a flight and the child was sleeping on the floor. But when Wouter is mentioned, or Wouter, by the way, my name is Armel. I've been fighting Heathrow Airport for 29 years. And one of our 3 MP is the Prime Minister, Boris Johnson. And can I say, as from today, he hasn't yet lied down in front of the bulldozers. He's having a nose job, I understand, today, so he's resting. But we have done probably most, yeah, I know you're laughing, John, but it's true. We've done just about everything that you've mentioned. When it comes to journalists, they are only interested when we are losing our homes, when there is bad news. The rest of the time, they don't want to know. We have regular meeting with our local MPs, with the airport, with Department of Transport. None of them want to know. The Secretary of State is I think he's got a private license, so he's not going to go, a pilot license, so he's not going to go against aviation. But certainly in the last few months, and I was listening for about 2.5 hours about cancellation and compensation a few days ago in Parliament in one of the select committee. And everybody was complaining that they haven't got the staff, that the government hasn't put enough money. What they forget is actually that in the UK, the whole aviation industry is private, and they were very happy to give billions of pounds to their shareholders. Now they want the taxpayer to pay for them, which is just not on. But the other thing is a lot of flights are being cancelled every day. British Airways has cancelled 16,000 flights, so that's 8,000 return flight, they call it, until October, from March to October. Gatwick said yesterday they want the same system, and that is because they haven't got the staff. And at Heathrow, just to make a point very shortly, my husband was a founder member of British European Airways in 1946. And the local flights and the European flights are always money losers. So British Airways never cancel as much as they can. They never cancel overseas flight where they make their money. They actually cancel the short haul, so within the UK or in Europe. And it is interesting that at the moment they are cancelling loads of them, and it makes no difference at all. So when you say that we could cancel a lot of flights, actually we can. And it is proved at the moment that you can, cancel flights and you can still function. So I think we would be very interesting near Heathrow Airport to understand how you can convince Boris and his mates that we should have less flights in the same way as in Amsterdam. Thank you.
And thanks very much, Armel. Just to say that Mikael's put a small correction in the chat. Thanks for that.
Maybe I can say something about this.
Yes, on you go.
Schiphol is also as big as Heathrow, so
Yep.
they are the same problems. They have not enough personnel, so there are many flights cancelled. They must 20% of passengers must be cancelled. People who have their holidays planned already. But what also is important, what you say, is always going about complaining. And I think I've tried that 5 years, but it didn't work. And well, I happen to be a psychologist, and I thought you might shift it to trying to help everybody who has a problem. Boris Johnson has a problem with the airports. So you might try to help him. That's the way we are trying to do it in the Netherlands now. The ministry has a big problem, and we are talking to the people who wants to make new policies to say, well, maybe we have good arguments you can use, and there are people working at the ministry who are on our side, but they're not, they're minority. So you can try, why shouldn't you try to work together with the ministry and the civil servants? It's not a guarantee, but it's better than only complaining, which surely doesn't work, I think.
I think John is the right person to actually been asked that question, because John has been involved at a very high level, and I would like John's view on that. But thank you very much, Wouter. John, can you reply to that?
Yes, I mean, I think that's right. I mean, I think our aim needs to be to influence government at the highest level. But I think that governments are in a position to listen to us, best of all, if they feel there's strength of feeling behind us. If it was just me, John Stewart, or individual Wouter Lohman going to see government, why should they listen to one individual? But I think the reason why they're listening is if they feel there's a groundswell of opinion that is behind us at a grassroots level. Now, I think you've demonstrated, Wouter, that is definitely the case these days at Schiphol. I think Armel and Joan and others who I see on the call from Heathrow would probably agree that over the last 10, 20 years, that groundswell of opinion and of opposition has appeared at Heathrow. And when they feel under that sort of pressure, then you're quite right, Armel, people can go in to government and they will at least listen. Because some of the civil servants, as you say about it, genuinely want to improve things. Others just feel that they're under pressure to do something. Otherwise, these troublesome residents won't go away. I was going to ask you a question about whether you have links in the Netherlands with people at other airports. Now, I know the Netherlands is a bit unique because Schiphol is so much the dominant airport, but there have been protests, I think, at other airports as well. And do you have a network where you talk with each other and work with each other? And then I'll come to Darlene.
Well, we have a network in the Netherlands, but the other airports are very small. My most important source is Uecna, with Martin, who's fighting at Frankfurt, and LF3, I was fighting at Athens Venizelos, and yes, at Vienna with Manfred. Well, we learn from each other, so you should be a member of Uecna. I think that's important.
Keep the advert going. There is, just before I come to Darlene and then Eleuthera, there's a lot of truth, certainly when I was at Heathrow, that Heathrow has more in common with Schiphol and Frankfurt and Charles de Gaulle than, because it's such a big airport, than it perhaps has with some of the smaller airports in the UK. So there's truth in what you say, Wouter, that and as you and Armel have just demonstrated, that airports of a similar size face similar challenges and probably similar opportunities. Darlene, you've been waiting patiently.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the excellent presentation. A couple comments. The legal protections. In the US, we have very limited legal protections. They're all about land use, and they use the standard, which is DNL 65, which most people aren't going to hit. So I'd be curious in Europe, what are legal protections that have been effective? Second, the "Are you well prepared" slide was excellent. It'd be great if we could find a way to share best practices that locals have done around the world, actually. And thirdly, the chat comment about the propaganda about airplanes become quieter, et cetera. it would be great if we could do a paper to refute this, because that is a very common myth that keeps getting said. Oh, our airplanes are getting quieter and we're investing all this money to make them quieter. And we all know that on arrivals, the engine noise isn't what causes the noise, for example. So that's an opportunity. And I just want to applaud the groundswell agreement. My efforts nationally in the US are trying to get multiple communities to write letters together, which is what you were saying, John. That gets more attention than just one group. Thank you.
Thanks for those points, Darlene. Very useful. Legal protection, has it been effective? The second point about sharing best practice, and the third one about undermining the propaganda about planes getting much quieter. Wouter, do you want to kick off, and others may want to come in as well?
Best practices is the most simple. That's on our website. There are a few pages with examples, and they're open for new examples. So you can mail them to the Uecna website. The form is there's a form, and you'll find best practices on key issues and actions. So I try to fill that, because I'm the webmaster. I try to fill that more every time I hear new things. So that's the most simple one. The other one was the legal protection. Well, the Constitution says that it has to protect everybody from health damage. So there are some entrances for law, I think. And in the Netherlands, there are more. You also need a nature permit to operate an airport. And Schiphol Airport has a license for 400,000 flights. And we're flying 500,000 in 2019. So they have a point. And another point is the nitrogen, I said. It's really a hard point for the government. They have to follow the European law they made themselves, and they are having much higher values of nitrogen in the air and on the ground, and it's all because of aircraft and industry and cattle. That's idiot in the Netherlands, but we make a lot of cattle. We make it. It's our industry. Yes, John.
And I'll just say, on following up on that point. Yes, in the Netherlands there is some legal protection, and in some of the countries, Darlene, I think it varies a lot across European countries. One of the things we've been pressing for in Uecna for many years, there's something the European Union draws up directives. That's kind of laws that member states need to obey. And there can be directives on everything from air pollution to housing and what have you. Now, there's an EU noise directive, but it's not strong because it doesn't have standards or targets which the member states have got to meet. The air pollution directive does have standards and targets, and as a result, it's driven policy and driven air pollution down. So the point you make is excellent. We do need effective legal protection, and it could come in the EU through a revision of the noise directive, as long as it has those targets and standards, as long as it's got something measurable. On the point of quieter planes, we'll maybe come back to them in a minute, because I see Eleuthera and Mikael have got hands up, and Mikael may actually cover the point of quieter planes. But Eleuthera, you go next.
Okay, thank you. Wouter, you've made a marvelous presentation, and I wanted to make I wanted to share some thoughts. I think that you are very lucky because your government wants to help and she wants to be helped. But here in Greece, we don't face the same situation. because here all the politicians and most of the local ones, which are sometimes ministers also, appoint people in the airport. So we feel we cannot trust them. You say that if there are any laws that we can rely on, yes, we have some laws that we can rely, but who sees if they're
enforced?
Yes, if they're forced. Our government doesn't comply always with the European laws and regulations, but who is there to see that? Yes, they take initiatives to change the rules, but they always tailor them to fit their points and the aviation sector needs. And about the other two questions about if our airport meets all the licenses and do major suppliers have all the permits, who dares to ask these questions to this to this institute? We also have other regulatory bodies that are supposed to take care of people's health and well-being, but they never do that. So I don't really know how we should cope with all that. And that's the difficult here. Our government, not only this one, but all the governments of all these years doesn't want to be helped. They help the airport. They help with laws, with whatever they can. And that's the bad thing here in Greece.
Mathilda, thank you very much for that. It was useful to have that account from Greece because, as we were saying earlier, it's different in different countries. Wouter, I'll come back to you maybe in a minute or two. I'll take 1 or 2 points first and then come back to you for a kind of summing up. Michele, I think you wanted to come in.
Yeah, well, we keep talking about noise pollution, right? Noise reduction, but we are not really successful with it anywhere in the world. So and I mean, for maybe locally, air pollution rules are going to help us, but isn't the CO2 reduction because of the climate change our biggest friend at the moment? Yeah, that was just something because we keep talking about noise pollution, and I think maybe that's not really what we should focus on.
I think 2 things, Michele. My own view is that we probably do need to keep talking about noise because nobody else will. But having said that, I think you're absolutely right that the main driver right now, as far as governments are concerned, as far as the industry is concerned, is to deal with CO2 emissions. They're under pressure to, yeah, go on.
Well, yes, we need to keep talking about noise reduction because they have these plans for electric planes or whatever they are coming up with, and so we need to. I mean, maybe we need to also focus, and I think that's happening in the Netherlands. Is trying to convince the government or the ministries that the energy required for this type of flights is ridiculous. And maybe there's some parts in the world, maybe even people in this call who are in a very sunny place where there's enough energy, but in the Netherlands, it's I mean, that's crazy. They wish, but it's never going to happen. And maybe that's also something people can focus on. I mean, it might be a little bit relevant for this webinar. Tell your government that the energy required, do the math. And I mean, at this point, for Schiphol airport only, they need 50 nuclear plants for just doing the energy that's in kerosene to translate that into kilowatts. 50 nuclear plants And I mean that's the math, and it's solid, and it's not going to work. Where are you going to put all the plants? I mean,
yeah, absolutely right. It's just not going to happen, is it? It's just not going to happen.
Yes.
Just before we leave you, and I'll go back to Wouter for a few last words. You've put something interesting in the chat, Michael, about how planes have barely reduced in noise over the last. It goes back to the point that Darlene was making, I think, about how there's a lot of propaganda about quieter planes. Do you just want to say what you put in the chat, because I thought it was a useful fact?
Sorry, I didn't quite get the question.
You put something in the chat, I think, about quieter planes.
Yeah, so an engineer here in the Netherlands has proven, has the data for 15 years of decibel measurements, and the average noise in 15 years was reduced by 1%. So the average noise that a plane is making, and the promises from the industry are like 1 or 3% reduction in noise per year, and or per model. But some models, you know, they fly with some planes for 20 years. So I mean, it doesn't help. It's if Boeing or Airbus is designing a new plane, not everyone is using it instantly. Not all the planes in the world are phased out. So the actual, I mean, whatever they promise, in 15 years there was only 1% reduction in decibel noise, and I mean we need 220 years to get on the World Health Organization levels at this speed.
Absolutely right. Now, that's very useful, and it ties in with the previous webinar we had when Finlay was talking to us about reductions, and he was just saying it's going to be incredibly difficult to get the technology for noise reductions. We're coming almost to an end. We've got about 3 minutes left. So Wouter, I'm going to leave you with the 3 minutes just to sum up and pick up any points you wish to do so.
Yes, the only way of noise reduction is reducing the number of flights. That's clear. That's the only way to reduce noise, in my opinion. And about the political system, in the Netherlands, we have many parties. So we have always some allies who can bring their point in parliament. I don't know how it is in Greece, but we have always friends in parliament, although they don't have the majority. And it's only since last week that there's a majority for reducing flights because of other pressures, and mostly for CO2, but also for ultrafine particles. So that's a future which might help change policies. Well, that's to answer.
Listen, thank you very much, Wouter. Thank you all very much for coming once again. Thank you, Wouter, in particular, for stimulating a really thought-provoking and useful conversation. That's probably the last seminar before the summer holidays, but we'll be doing webinars again in the autumn. We're also, as Uecna, looking to put on a conference for not perhaps quite a full day conference, but a 2/3 of the day conference online sometime in the autumn, to which everybody will be very welcome indeed, where we can probably discuss issues in a little bit more depth than we can on an hour-long webinar. So thank you very much. And
thank you.
If you haven't had your summer holidays, have good summer holidays, and see you all well before the end of the year. Thanks very much.